Welcome, everybody, to Machaut meets Fairbanks, making early music scores for silent films. We're so lucky to have Tina Chancey today, and we do hope that when things happen next year, sometime before the very end of 2021 and into the winter of 2022, we'll have her canceled concert actually happening at Corpus Christi. I can't wait. Tina, as most of you know, is a wonderful musician, keen intellect, and just incredible curiosity about all sorts of things. You'll find this out as we go along.
Okay,
This is just a reminder to you to there'll be a short Q&A at the end. You can use the chat function while Tina's talking to leave your questions, and Henry Lee will be in charge of that. Stay tuned. April 11th, the week after Easter, Susan Hellauer and Clifton Boyd will be talking about Jim Crow and Zip Coon, racial stereotypes in American popular music. Not quite music before 1800, but it'll be fabulous, I'm sure. And our treasurer is here, and so I have to remind you to donate, but in the meantime, take note of our virtual concert starting the first Sunday in May with the string quartet and then 3 harpsichordists. The last one, Martin Bernstein, is a recorder player, but Justin Taylor, a fabulous harpsichordist. So we're getting going. Our season is finally launched, and without further ado, forgot about the benefit on June 2nd. We're honoring Scott Metcalf. Tracy Cowart, some of you know from Amherst, will be in charge of our online auction, and it will be fun. You have to provide your own glasses, your own wine, but it's our first, and I would hope, but maybe can't promise, only virtual benefit. Henry, have I forgotten anything? Support us, I already said that. All right, Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Actually,
yes.
Oh, yes, good. Okay, great. So thanks to Louise and to Henry and to Music Before 1800, who have invited me to come and talk about my 17 years creating silent film scores of early music. How did it start? I kind of thought a good format for this would be question and answer, but I know what the questions are, so I'm going to ask them for a while and talk to myself, and then later you can ask them. So how did it start, Tina? Well, one day in April 2003, Hesperus was performing in Arlington County, where we are an ensemble in residence in Arlington County, Virginia. And somebody came up afterwards, a technician, and said, have you ever thought of playing for silent films? There are a lot of historic silent films, and they're set in the past, and your music would be great. And I said, no, I don't think so. That really sounds like, really pretty hard. I don't think we can do that. And he said, well, just in case. And he gave me the videos of 2 silent films. I think it was The Gallant Rogue and Robin Hood. And I took a look at it and I was intrigued, because it really seemed like a natural. And so a year later, we did our first silent film and silent early music collaboration, which was Robin Hood, and never really looked back from there. We used English Renaissance music for Robin Hood, even though it was set in the Middle Ages. Actually, I think that Robin Hood is more of a Renaissance kind of guy, except for when he went to the Far East. He went on crusade, or maybe not the Far East, but the East. And for that, we used some medieval music to show that he was no longer home. And it worked very nicely. And since then, we've derived scores for more than 8 or 9 silent films, most of them made between 1920 and 1928, and more than a dozen animations from 1907 to 1926. So basically, we create 3 kinds of scores. We create early music scores, which are things like European medieval music for the Hunchback, Spanish Renaissance and Spanish colonial music for the Mark of Zorro, because Zorro is set in California, French Renaissance and French folk music for the Three Musketeers, and cantigas for Hassan. And for most of them, we've tried to use music from when the film was set, though some of these films were set in the imaginary past, and we could just kind of guess. So we use early music scores. We'd make also period scores, but not early music. For example, we do the film The Golem, which is about the Jews of Prague. And for that one, we use Sephardic and Ashkenazi music. And then we use music from the American Civil War for the general, which is set then. But we also, and this is new, we do German medieval and Renaissance music plus Rom, Gypsy music, and Eastern European music for the German expressionist film Nosferatu. And we also add electronic sounds, and this is where I'm getting curious and interested. We're going to be doing that. There he is. We're going to be doing that. Hopefully it's coming out in October. It was going to come out earlier, but one of our members ended up having a baby, and so she's going to be busy for a while. Now, we also do we also do improvisation for animations for cartoons, and not just hand-drawn cartoons, but stop motion photography, cut paper, things like that. So we just call animation. And our scores for that range from early music by Dowland and Susato to blues, free improvisation, and various other kinds of total silliness. So what do I mean by the imaginary past that I keep talking about, or maybe the imaginal past, which is, I looked it up and it means pretty much the same thing. You see, when we think about it, most of the people that I've mentioned, the film subjects, we take a lot of these as historic, authentic figures, but frankly, none of them were real people in a real time and place. Robin Hood was an amalgam of tenuous historical facts and lots of fiction. Fairbanks production cobbled the script together using a lot of Robin Hood legends. See, the earliest Robin Hood was a man named Robert Hood, who was a lone 13th century outlaw. He changed through the centuries, got an entourage and a noble pedigree at the time of Henry VIII, because Henry VIII wanted him to be noble, so he kind of made him a noble. And later on, not right away, but later on, Robin Hood got a social conscience, and he started robbing from the rich to give to the poor. Well, at the beginning, he was just an outlaw. So that was what you call a constructed past, right? Now, some of our films were based on published literature. Zorro was a minor character in the fictional series The Curse of Capistrano. Fairbanks' wife, Mary Pickford, was reading it on their honeymoon and said, "Why don't you option that, honey? You've been trying to get out of the drawing room comedy circuit. You're tired of wearing a tuxedo. You want to be able to be athletic and jump around." And as a matter of fact, Zorro was the first film of the new genre called the swashbuckler. Then The Three Musketeers. It was drawn from the Dumas novel. Victor Hugo's book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was originally called Notre Dame de Paris. It was really dark and dreary. Good things did not happen. In that book, the movie cleared it up. That at least 2/3 of the protagonists end up happy. The Golem was one of the strange ones. It was a popular German expressionist book with no visible plot. There he is now. It was basically a kind of a tone poem, a mood book, and somebody courageous actually made a storyline out of that. And Nosferatu was, let's see what they say here, it was thinly veiled version of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1897. And those were basically monster movies, right? But they were based on literature. So it turns out that only The General was closely based on a real event. During the Civil War, the American Civil War, 23 volunteer Union soldiers stole a Confederate train. Unfortunately, after a long but fairly sedate chase across North and South Carolina, they went 20 miles per hour, so it was kind of slow, but they ran out of coal, and they were subsequently caught and hung. The movie had a much better ending, much more spectacular. The train just kind of plunged off a bridge. That was fun to play music for. So, none of these really, except the last one, were based on something real. So, why not add the music that you want to, right? And as a matter of fact, if you were talking to me now, you would say, if these stories were made up, why use period music and try to make the performance as authentic as possible? Good question. One of my goals in using authentic period music in a fictional piece is to give a grounding and a sense of context to that imaginary past. I mean, I'll tell you a secret here. That could be because although we early musicians profess to represent the past in a historically informed manner, early music performance is just an imaginary. I got a quote here from someone. In concepts of authenticity in early music and popular music communities. Love that title. Elizabeth Upton says this. She says, to be convincing in performance for current audiences, music written before the 19th century invention of classical music, interesting thing, that is, music for which no continuous performance style exists. It must, besides making musical sense on its own terms, engage with whatever opinions about the past the performers and the audience hold. In this way, modern day's ideas about the past will always affect performance style for early music. And as ideas about the past change, we should expect to find early music performance styles changing as well. And, I think she's right. I mean, when I first came to New York in 1970, Pro Musica was playing Josquin's El Griot with bass crumhorn and sopranino recorder in a duet, right? That was the introduction. And they'd be laughed off the stage if they did that now. So things change. It was fun, though. It was fun to hear. Anyway, okay, next question. In any case, why would we make our own soundtrack when a new one was always composed for the films? I mean, they were expensive, those films, and they had big premieres, and there was always a soundtrack written. Well, when a film would start touring after that big premiere, the smaller movie houses around the country, they seldom used the original score. It was expensive to rent and required a big orchestra. The performing of a contingent of some of those small theaters often had a single pianist or organist, or maybe there was a drummer, maybe there was a violinist. The lone keyboard player would improvise, guided by written notes on the sequence and character of the scenes provided by the movie studio, so there'd be crib notes. And quite often, the lone keyboard player would derive their themes from printed collections of generic love songs, chase music, marches, and Indian chants. Things like that. As a matter of fact, in Cleveland, when I was a kid, I took one of those books out of the library. I had no idea what it was, but, there was like love music and chase music. And, each of these genres had its own da-la-la, da-la-la. I thought it was hysterical. What did I know? So accompanists might also improvise over a particular genre of music called light classics. And there was a tradition in any event of improvisation and eclecticism when it came to accompanying silent film. And the earliest silent films were shown in 1905 in Nickelodeons, and the projectors were hand cranked, right? And so the scope of early film period, 1905 or so, that was the beginning of the public ones, to 1927. And about then was the advent of silent films in America, though they came later to Europe. Well, you might ask me, do I make up the music? And I would say, oh no. It's real early music on authentic instruments. I've played early music for 50 years. And when I look at a possible film, a repertoire usually suggests itself to me. And most of these films end up having three kinds of musical accompaniments. Either we do early music just as it is for processionals, fights, action scenes, where it's important to have the rhythm of the music keep going. Then, and this is the fun one, it's early music that we transform somehow according to what happens on the stage, like different scorings, right? We change scorings. We deconstruct it, so there's one line at a time playing. We loosen the meter so it's not so rhythmic anymore. And then we improvise. So we do that, and then we do music that's totally improvised. We do that to create a mood. It's not necessarily related to a particular piece of early music at all, but it probably sounds early. We're using early instruments in the style that we know and love. So if I could geek out for a minute, okay, playing live to film is hard. And improvising over existing film is virtually impossible. It's really hard. And that's what we specialize in this situation. Our film scores have various amounts of improvisation. Okay, Robin Hood is 25% improvisation, let's say. Mark of Zorro is 90% improvisation because it consists mostly of Ortiz retrocatas that we extend and improvise over while watching the action, which makes it harder. It's kind of like three-dimensional tic-tac-toe. Let's see, and you've got a picture of Zorro here. I wanted to show that. Yeah. And so you notice what we're doing is we're facing the audience, but there's a monitor right in front of us by which we see the screen just like everybody else. So in a second, we're going to show you an example of Zorro, okay? So, but I wanted to tell you first, I call this a collaboration. And it was a particularly mind-boggling collaboration with the Mark of Zorro. Just like the statement, silent films were seldom silent, right? Another truism is improvisation is seldom totally free. There are always some type of guidelines, if only the absence of guidelines. I mean, it could be said that all improvisation, with no matter what kind of guidelines, requires the same basic skills, right? Concentration, immersion in the moment, good short-term memory, spontaneity, and responsiveness. Okay, so collaboration with a fixed element such as film not only increases the number of guidelines, but it changes the balance of them that you have to do. And it requires some new ones, like visual responsiveness. You see something, you immediately respond musically. And also you have to be able to pace yourself because films are 90 minutes long, 2 hours long, and you got to be able to keep playing through that film and be inventive. So collaboration with a fixed element like film not only increases the number of guidelines, but then changes them like that. And you might find it funny that I'm calling collaborating with a fixed element because after all, that film was done 100 years ago. But I've got to say, there's an interaction, right? While the film doesn't actually change, the improvised music changes the audience's experience of the film. And the film's action changes both the audience's and the performer's experience of the music. So, hey, I call that a collaboration. Now, with this, we inject a second fixed element, right? In this case, we limit the kind of improvisation we're doing to variations over a repeating chord pattern. And that's another kind of filter that challenges our spontaneity. It requires a certain amount of brain power to arrive on the proper chord tone at the proper moment, though on this level, as long as we get there, that's fine. But we add a third fixed element, which is when we improvise to a 120-minute film over a series of repeating chord patterns in the style of Ortiz. We're really shooting ourselves in the foot there. So how can we possibly make good music with so many constraints? And yet we do. So I wanted to give you an example of that. So here's a scene from Zorro that Grant Harrod and I play. You'll recognize this piece. And I was playing the viol too. I kind of came in after that and played the viol. I overdubbed that. So if it's so hard, how do I get other people to do this with me? There are fools everywhere, but actually what I've got is I'm very lucky to have three adventurous people who will do this with me. Grant Herod plays plucked instruments, Priscilla Herod plays winds, and Nelson Natus sings. And we've also worked with Scott, of course, Scott Rice, Tom Zajac, Rosa Lamoureux, Brian Kay, and Nicolo Seligman. And they've all been wonderful. The singer does the least improvisations. She sings songs that are basically chosen for their resonance with the plot, except for one bizarre place in Zorro where somebody is whipped to the tune of an evil-sounding Christmas villancico. So our process is that we make a detailed script, and that's what it looks like. You notice we've got the scene, the music, the elapsed time, and the scene length there. And there are action details of each scene, and you see in the middle, it's the piece of music, how many times we do, things like that. And we choose the music for the different scenes, depending on the rhythm of the scene. Whoops. Because each scene, I'm sorry, do you see that? Mine does that too. Very weird. Each scene has an internal rhythm, which is kind of interesting. You can see it by how people walk in the scene, how they gesture, how they talk. Often people had music behind them when they were acting silent film. So we try to find the essence of that scene rhythm and have a piece of music that's rhythm. We arrange it and shape it. How many times? Is there an intro? Things like that. And then we try it and do a lot of experimenting. How does the energy of the scene change, for example? Sometimes the music needs to change tempo and character depending on what happens in that scene. And then how do we transition from one scene to the other? That's a tricky thing. Someone asks, did I learn this from anybody? Well, I did this for 15 years on my own. And then I thought it would be useful to apprentice with someone. I apprenticed with an excellent film music composer named Brian Keene in Connecticut. And he basically trained me with our DVD of Robin Hood. It was a collaboration. And Hunchback, 2 years later, was my graduation project. So let's see. Now is a good time to talk about the cartoons a little bit. I've been fond of early cartoons for many years. 2 summers ago, I finally had some money and some time, and I found two creative and stalwart people, Brian Kay and Spiff Wiegand, who each play about a dozen instruments and are fluent in 4 or 5 musical styles. So we made an animation DVD that has 12 animations, accompanied, as I was saying before, by blues, free improvisation, folk music, early music, humming, mouth sounds, using banjos and Chinese jaw harp, kazoos, toy pianos. It was a fun recording session, let me tell you. And so the last thing we'd like to play for you is Brian Kay's accompaniment to an animation of its stop motion tour de force called The Automatic Moving Company. And Brian plays a Dowland fancy. And listen to what he does with it to support the action on that, okay? Amazing. So, oh yes, this is from our, as a final piece, Coco's Earth Control, The End of the World as We Know It, an amazing cartoon. You'll love it. But if I play them all for you now, you can't ask me questions. So, who has some questions?
So, all right, thank you, Tina. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to unmute everybody for just a few seconds. Let's applaud for Tina first. All right, let's do it. There we go. Sorry.
Okay.
You're muted, right?
I feel applauded for.
Yeah, let me pull up some questions here. Just give me a second. The first question is from Paul Ross. He asked, which movie scores, silent movies or otherwise, if any, influenced your approach to scoring for films? Sorry, Tina, you're muted. Oops.
How about that? Better?
Yes.
Okay. That's actually an interesting question because there's a bunch of different ideas about how audible or how important the score should be in the movie. That a lot of people think that the score needs to be almost invisible. If you can hear it, if you can actually notice it, then it's too audible. And I don't feel that way. I think of it as a collaboration. So I go for those movies that have scores that you enjoy the sound of as you watch. And there are a lot of scores that have talking. If you don't have talking, that's really interesting because it's a different balance then. You're thinking, well, how do I support this scene so that people really get a sense of the heightened energy, things like that. And I love doing early music because so often it just gives a great sense of context. So I like scores that make a difference that you can really hear rather than scores that kind of disappear. People will fight me on that.
All right. Here's another question from Daniel Adultery Wise.
Hi.
Why do you feel drawn to making scores for silent films? Do you have a hope for how the work will have?
I didn't hear at the end. I have a hope for how the work will.
How the work will have an impact.
Impact,
As in, I guess, an impact on.
I do early music. What impact do we have on the world? I do it because it's fun and I can. And because it makes a difference to how people experience it. And there are folks who actually probably would never want to do this. There are folks who feel like, in a way, it changes the music too much, or it doesn't respect it, for example, because we are changing the music to reflect what happens on the screen. And I just like collaborations generally. I like improvising to poetry, and I like working with dancers, and I like different types of music collaborations. And this just seemed to be one of the most difficult and rewarding ones I could do. So I'm actually not too worried about impact. I'm just trying to make good products that people like.
Okay, let me get another question here. This is from Joyce Bodick. Where were these shown? Where are they stored? I think she's referring to films.
The silent films themselves. They were shown, as I said, they were shown in Nickelodeons until about the 1915s or 16s. So silent films at first were in kind of arcades, and you'd put a penny in and you'd see a silent film in the viewer. And then they ended up in storefronts, just plain old storefronts, where they'd have a projector and a screen, and there you were. And you just showed the latest silent film. And they changed, the program of the silent films changed 2 or 3 times a week. And each of the films was maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes long. And they got longer and longer, and started really having a plot about the year 1910. 1912. And the first thing they did was they made films of books that everyone knew, like Alice in Wonderland. It was a great little silent film made of that. And there was silent Shakespeare, which you would not think would actually work. But usually that film traveled around the country with some guy who sat there and told you about the plot. And so then you would be able to have some context for seeing the film, which was always kind of abridged. So silent films are really pretty amazing. Actually, it's been a real privilege to work with it.
Tina, I meant when, after you put the score with them, where have they been shown?
Oh, where have they been shown? I see. Well, there are film festivals around the country. And so we've been to 7 or 8 of them. There are early music series that like these silent films, and we've been to 10 or 15 of those. There's a place in DC called the Silver, right? Anybody remember Bethesda Silver Silent series, which is one of the premier houses in the country, and they've been very nice to us. They've had us come and do their films. We were commissioned by the in Williamsburg, there's an international festival. We were commissioned to do Nosferatu for them. So gets around. We haven't played in Europe yet. I look forward to that. Oh, we've also been at places like the Boston Museum of Art. We've done things at the Metropolitan for their education department and stuff like that. Never outside. Too bad. Okay, what?
All right, so we see a question here from Alice Robbins. I think she'll try to clarify that a little bit. Do the crib notes still exist? If you understand
there
that.
were crib notes for what was supposed to, what the character was, or how to proceed with each scene.
There are crib notes that still exist. It turns out in Culpeper, Virginia, the Library of Congress has a film vault. It used to be a place that housed weapons, and then it housed congressmen. So if you wanted to keep your politicians safe, you'd put them in this vault in Culpeper. And now it's their silent film archive. And there's a remarkable number of things. Every year, there's something called Mostly Lost, which is a 4-day event that celebrates silent films. And there's lots of things being shown and discussions and stuff like that. And that's where they have lots and lots of resources, including these notes to what you would do in these various films. It's kind of fun to see. Yeah. I don't see
All right. There are even more questions there. Questions are coming in through the chat function. So should we keep going for a little bit?
I'm okay with that. Do you want to?
All right.
Okay.
Laura Libben, how did you sync up the music with the moving objects? I think referring to the last film.
Well, part of that was what Brian did, and he was great. So he basically had to memorize his music, right? So he could be watching. My favorite is near the end when the plates are coming up. And that section, I think that's why he chose that piece in the first place, because it was so interesting and so collaborative. And then when we edited it, we did a little shoving here and there and made sure that a fair number of activities, like actions, something that would happen in the visuals, were supported by strong beats in the music. That's called Mickey Mousing in the trade. And it sounds kind of crass, but actually it turns out to be a very, very good way to reinforce the rhythm of a scene. So I thought Brian did a beautiful job with that.
All right.
Andrew.
So we have a question from Neil Plotkin. Some of your scores have song texts. Is that particularly hard to balance with silent film action?
We try to choose texts that actually support and comment on the action in some way. So even though we don't, we don't translate them, in the film that it generally, if there's a love song, Nell is singing something loving to some love song happening on stage. The only time that wasn't was that Christmas Villancico. And Nell said it was very, very strange to be singing something that was so totally at odds with this person who was getting whipped. Yeah, well, it seemed like the right piece of music at the time. Turned out to be awkward.
Let's just do one last question here.
Okay.
From Celia Merzbacher. Did you have access to any recordings of the silent movie scores that were performed at the premieres or elsewhere?
They're available. Someone named Gillian Anderson has made it her life's work right now to restore and perform a lot of these movie scores with the original movies. And they're great. I mean, composers like Korngold, who was a composer who was really underrated, was one of the people who wrote quite lovely music for scores for films. And that was nice, but most of those scores weren't really in coordination with what was going on the screen. And I wanted something that was tied more to the action. So ours are not only a little bit smaller, but a little bit more collaborative in that way.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Tina. So to learn more about Tina Chancey and Hesperus, do visit hesperusplayszorro.com. Tina has suggested us to go to this website instead of going to her personal website,
which is somewhat chaotic at the moment. And there's more on YouTube as well. If you're interested in looking, just look up. I think it's Hesperus Early Music and Early Film. And
yeah, so both of the clips we play today are on YouTube, and there are so many.
Oh, as well as, and I've got to say, just a second, The Hunchback of Notre Dame came out just when the pandemic started, and rather than sell it, I just put it up on YouTube. So we've got a whole one up there, and that's Hesperus Hunchback. Thank you.
All right. So I want to remind everybody that we have our next lecture on April 11th with Susan Hallauer and Clifton Boyd. We look forward to seeing all of you there. And to sign up and to learn more about these events, please go to our website at mb1800.org. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.